I need you to hate so I can use you for your energy.
This is real sales talk. Real sales advice from real sales practitioners. Giving you tips on how to dominate your sales quota are your co-hosts, Sean Mitchell and Phill Keen. This episode is brought to you by Convertist. We are incredibly excited to have partnered together with Convertist, which helps SaaS and services run managed outbound campaigns for teams looking to drive new pipeline opportunities. For teams targeting mid-size and enterprise deals, Convertist integrates with CRMs like Salesforce to uncover actionable data in their sales processes, which enables them to find areas of improvement and double down on strategies that actually work. Benchmark the lead generation performance expected of a seasoned SDR and identify actionable areas of improvement in a sales process, all out of one place with Convertist. For teams looking to measure and enhance their performance of their sales funnel and architect a better revenue engine, cast an application to join the Convertist Slack group. It's at convertist.com/Slack. That's Convertist, convertist.com/Slack, SLACK.
What is going on, Real Sales Talk family? We have a special treat for you. If you are all avid listeners of podcasts like Sean and I are, you're not. I'm sure you've heard this name before, Will Barron from the Salesman Podcast. Will, thanks for coming on. This is a treat.
Hey, I'm glad to have you on. I'm glad to talk sales. As we before we click record, I'm glad to have some of the pressure off me and just to chat as opposed to be firing questions back at a guest. So yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, it's fun. Sean and I sometimes, I don't know how much of a listener you are of Real Sales Talk, but we jump on and he and I will kind of spar back and forth. And it's fun to get into some dialogue and just talk sales and be generally interested. And I'm sure that's the same position you is. I know Sean and I started Real Sales Talk just by wanting to talk to really smart salespeople and learn a lot, which takes us into our topic. But that's why we started. Why'd you start podcasting?
I'll give you the kind of 30-second kind of go at this, but I worked in medical device sales. I knew I wanted to take that next step. I always had this element of entrepreneurship and I'd paid myself through university for a small company. And so I knew I was always going to end up starting a business. And I was getting to the end of my tether with the medical device sales role. My manager, he was a good guy, but there was a kind of clashing between us. And I knew I wanted to take the next step. And so I was proactively looking for a sales podcast, for some kind of media, for something for salespeople that wasn't all weird corporate, a guy or a woman in a suit with a kind of whiteboard behind them being weirdly almost antagonistic against the salesperson and being kind of on the side of the sales manager. And that's what sprouted the Salesman Podcast. I created the content that I wanted to consume. And there's your show and there's plenty of new content that's come out since then. And so I think that market is kind of being filled now. And I think there is great content from yourself, from saleshacker.com, from hopefully the Salesman Podcast. But it was just it's the cliche entrepreneur kind of way to describe things, but I was scratching my own itch for sure. I just wanted to selfishly improve at sales by interviewing people who are far better than me. Kind of two, I have an excuse to interview. So I've interviewed astronauts, Olympic athletes on the show, people that I want to interview. It's an excuse to get them on board, give them some value and suck some value for me in the audience. And then, just because I saw that gap in the market and I wanted to fill it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's a lot to just generally being curious about sales. And I think you and I kind of have that same passion. So I know Sean's bummed he can't make it. He's out there in the field trying to close on some houses, but he's a big fan as well. So we appreciate you coming on. What we're going to do today is going to be interesting. So we've done this with a couple others. So Scott Ingram came on our show. He's a podcaster. We've had a couple other podcasters come on. And Sean and I want to do the Cliff Note version of what we've learned from Salesman Podcast. So you have 6 topics that we're going to hit on quick, rapid fire. Give them reasons to come listen to your show if it makes sense. But we want to know what you've learned. So you've interviewed 300 people, more than 300 people now. And you've interviewed the smartest of the bunch for the most part. So I think there's a lot of people out there that you talk to, you've learned a lot from. So let's get into it. Let's get into some content. Tell me some of the things that you've learned over your 300 or so podcast.
You kind of touched on it there, Phill, of the majority of the people I've had on the show are smart. There's been a few stinkers. There's been a few episodes more recently that haven't gone out. And this kind of leads on to the first thing that I've learned in that, and the first kind of 2 points tied together in that I think it's really important for salespeople when they're looking for content, when they're looking for courses, looking for training, looking for ways to improve themselves, is to not buy into hype. So social selling, and you can give me your thoughts on this, of course, but social selling, I feel kind of falls into this arena in that I believe social selling is useful for some people. I don't think it's the godsend. I don't think it's the magic bullet that everyone hopes and expects. And when people read books on it, assume that it is. And I think this is really easily demonstrable of if your customers are on social media, then you should be communicating with them on social media. If they're not on social media, then you should be where they are. If you're selling to farmers, it's unlikely that they're tweeting. So a good example of this from one of my audience members, he sells heavy machinery, essentially massive tractors to farmers on like an industrial scale. He was asking me about social selling and he wanted to get into it. He wanted to jump ahead of his competition and be on there and build a brand before anyone else. So that's one element. Sure, building personal brand, being searchable is useful. But his customers aren't on social media. They're not tweeting the rounds that they're doing at 4:00 in the morning as they're going over the land and doing whatever irrigation that needs to be done. They're at farming markets. They're at farming events. They're in person. And so my kind of humble advice to him was to get off Twitter and spend time shaking hands with some dudes and women with flat caps wearing tweed at these events. And that to me kind of wipes social selling off the board in a lot of cases. I know for me, selling to surgeons, very few surgeons were on social media when I was in medical devices. Maybe that's changed now slightly because it's kind of a few years departed that I worked in medical devices. But at the time, there was no point to be on Facebook, to be on LinkedIn, to be adding them on or stalking them on Instagram and then adding them on LinkedIn. It was pointless. So I think there's an element here of if someone's selling you something in the sales space, considering that most people who are selling something in the sales space, they're going to be a pretty good salesperson. I'm not saying that you should have your guard up, but I'm saying that you should appreciate that not all content training is created equal. And I think the fundamentals, which we'll come on to in a second, is important as anything else. I think there's lots of fads, there's lots of trends, but I think to really win in sales, if you got the fundamentals right, you're probably 90% of there.
Yeah, I think the social selling thing, if you look at the people that are doing it well, right, they're really just personal brand builders. They're putting their name out there a lot, and they're good at doing things like what we're doing right now is creating podcasts and blogging, or there's some kind of medium that they can take over and they've expanded their self on. But they're really not selling directly to people. They're selling through that network to the next network of people that they're actually interacting with and then selling to. So it's more around changing thought process and changing the way people are thinking. But to your point is not everybody's on LinkedIn or social media or Twitter or Facebook or whatever that looks like. And they're not all reading content on Medium, or they're not all reading content in any place. So you got to go to where they are. I think that's a great call out. So from things you learn, and you've interviewed people on every side of the aisle, which is cold callers and emailers and social media people and people that are inbound marketers. Like you've interviewed such a wide range of people. What they do doesn't always work for you, and I think it's finding the thing that works for you well. That's a great call out. So
just to touch on something here. So you mentioned personal brand, and that's one of my other points later on. That's the last point. So hopefully we'll get to that because there's a lot to get through here. But on personal brand, there's one, and I'll tell you who it is off air. I don't want to drop a minute, but there's one social selling expert, one of the bespoke, one of the people kind of leading this movement, as he would call it. He emailed one of my listeners who's a CSO of a Fortune 500 company. I'm surprised that he even listened to my show, to be honest. I lit up kind of a big grin when he emailed me telling me about this. But this social selling expert emailed a CSO. You'd think he at a Fortune 500 company, multi-billion-dollar a year industry or kind of vertical that they own, they dominate. This is the person that you want to write bespoke emails to. This is the person that you want to customize your templates if you're going to use templates. And this dude, this social selling expert, called him Jane. Dear Jane at the top of the email. Totally just screwed any relationship that he's got or potential opportunity for relationship with this social selling expert for the foreseeable future, probably forever, just because you can't preach one thing and then practice another. And I feel like in the space, there are people doing that, and there are people making a quick buck. And I'm convinced in this kind of 2-year period from here, as sales continues to change, a lot of these people are going to get called out. And I just thought that was an interesting example of it's important to watch what people are doing when they're selling, even if they're trying to sell you something. If you are a kind of sales leader as you listening or watching this, it's important to see what they're doing versus what they're saying. I think that's a more telling story.
Yeah, it's very easy to take ideas from somebody else and hear it and just regurgitate that over and over. But being able to put it into practical use is something that it's difficult and takes practice, and you can't mess up the fundamentals sometimes. So moving on, what other things? So what else have you learned? You've done 300 interviews. What's something else you learned?
Okay, so the fundamentals. Amazing segue, Phill. So fundamentals, I don't think have changed. I think the platforms have changed. I think if you're not in a highly complex B2B sales role, I think it's perhaps more difficult to get in the door. You've got less leverage. Information is out there. So clearly sales has changed. But I don't think fundamentally it has at all, in that you need to have the skill set to build rapport. You need to be able to add insights almost dynamically. So within a conversation, you need to be able to absorb information. You need to have enough knowledge of your industry and your vertical to calculate it, to crush it all in one side of your brain and shoot it out the other, and come out with a unique or interesting insights that keeps the conversation going for that next 25 minutes. And then closing, if you want to call it that, I believe, especially in complex B2B sales, if you've done everything right, the close is just a simple question at the end of the conversation, as opposed to any weird technique that we need to do. But I don't think these fundamentals have changed. Certainly, kind of when I was in medical device sales 4 or 5 years ago, it was the same process. Right now, when I'm selling ad space on the podcast, when I'm doing deals with the likes of, I don't know if you can see that, the Salesforce mug that I've got here in front of me, when I'm working with Salesforce, those fundamentals haven't changed. There's no magic bullet. There's no weird stuff going on. And so that's something I took away from the show, because I was expecting, and guests pitched me on it when I first started, I was perhaps more naive to this, that there was going to be this crazy one-line email that's going to change the world, or there was going to be this weird technique to get someone to open up and to build trust with someone quickly. But I think the fundamentals of building rapport, which is having an alignment in whether it's a hobby, whether it's the industry, whether it's just an insight, having some kind of alignment with someone, showing that you're like them in some way, and being honest and building kind of trust with people. I don't think that's changed. I don't believe that will change. So that was a revelation to me. I started the podcast hoping for all these insights and answers, and I got told what I already knew, and that fascinated me.
Yeah, I actually made a comment on a LinkedIn post you had the other day about like books that are being written today. And if you go back, like every book from the first few sales books that have ever been written to today, they're always about the same thing, just told a little bit different, right? There might be a little slight tweak to what was being said, but fundamentally they're the same thing. It's open up a conversation, build relationship, show where you have value, ask them if you want a deal closed, or whatever your fundamentals are. Like, you're not changing really fundamentally what you're doing. There might be things, to your point, the complex sale, right, is adding different elements. There's different things. There's more people involved. So the complexity of it is changing, and even the speed of it's changing. So we're doing more faster. We're asking people to work 50 opportunities, and we're asking them to get 7 different buying centers and all these different things involved. But fundamentally, the sales process and the methodology hasn't changed. Just got harder and faster.
So I don't even know if it's got harder. I think, and people look back, and I've had older ladies and gentlemen on the show who remember they call it the golden age of the cold call, where you could pick up the phone, you could sell a CMO on $1,000 kind of dollar a day project over the next kind of 3 or 4 years, and there was none of this SaaS nonsense. So I take that back. It wouldn't be $1,000 a day project. It would be kind of $500,000 in one lump sum, and then they'd get a big fat commission from it. But I think if you went back and did that now, I think it would still be tough. I think people look at those days to phrase it like that. I think they look back at that with rose tinted glasses. And I think right now you've got opportunities that you didn't have then, because it's fast moving. I feel like, and obviously I'm putting a positive spin on it here, which perhaps sums me up a little bit, but I think because it's so fast moving, you've got the opportunity to get ahead of your competition, just to get ahead of the industry, to get ahead of other people within your organization, to become a linchpin in your organization of knowledge, of information, so that you can help other people. And whether you want to get into sales management, whether you want to go into one of those more senior sales roles where perhaps commissions are higher or whatever it is, I think now is a great time with all the disruption. And I see it as a positive element to really double down on this and to really make a mark. So I don't think how difficult it is changed. I don't think it's got any harder. I don't think it's got any more difficult. I think it's just perhaps the adaptability of it. Maybe you can't just sit in your comfort zone the whole time. Perhaps you just got to push yourself a little bit more than what you've had to do in the past.
Yeah, I mean, definitely sales is always going to be hard work. Even as we have some of the elements that we're putting together, technology out there, there's still a lot of things, the human element's still going to matter in a lot of it. So, all right, what else have you learned over time? And what's the third thing? So we're at number 3. What's the third thing you've learned from?
You're taking the words out of my mouth here, Phill. I love it. So hard work is number 3. And I don't mean the Gary Vaynerchuk, just hustle more. I don't really take much from that. It's motivating in a video to see it in the morning if you're watching his content or the myriad of people who are trying to copy everything that he's doing. But just a quote, I don't find motivates me for more than by the time I've just had a cup of coffee and left the house and then I've forgotten about it. So I think there's 2 fundamentals too, if we want to define hustle. And this is something I've got from a number of guests who've come on the show. We've had SAS, which is Special Forces in the UK, had a Marine come on the show as well. And hustle for them is, I think, applicable for hustle for us. And they define it as essentially doing the right things in the morning. So whereas they would be essentially forced to make their bed and it must be pristine and the uniform must be pristine, even though we're going to take it off 5 minutes later and get dead muddy and shot at and all the other horrific stuff they have to go through in the training. The point of it is that you've done one thing right. So you're motivated from the very get-go. And even if you've had a terrible day, it's been atrocious, and you come back to your bed at night and it's all pristine, at least you go to bed knowing that you've achieved one thing that day. Same with the uniform. They get hounded that something isn't quite right. And the point of that is that it's never going to be right. And they're training them to deal with that little bit of adversity, get over that, so that when the real adversity comes later on in the day, they can deal with it. So for me in sales, it's if you've got to do cold calling, you get your cold calling done first thing. If you've got planning to do, if you've got admin, if you've got all the boring stuff, which for me was a real pain in medical device sales I was constantly, this is why there's friction between me and my manager. I just never did it. I always pitched it to myself that my job was to close deals, to hit target, and to be great in front of customers. I never prioritized the internal stuff that I had to do. And that was a mistake, because clearly your internal stakeholders are just as important as your customers if you want to have somewhat of a career in sales. So it's the Brian Tracy idea of eat the frog. So if you've got to eat the frog, if you've got a horrible task to do, you get it done early in the morning, first thing, then you get to enjoy the rest of the day, knowing that you've done it and it's out of the way. But if you put it off, if you procrastinate, the day just gets more and more miserable as time goes on, because you've got to eat it still at 4:30 when you want to go home at 5 or whatever the numbers are. So there's the doing the basics in the morning. This kind of defines hustle, doing the basics in the morning, and then not doing more of stuff, not doing 50 emails rather than 20, but going after the more difficult emails, going after the more difficult conversations, telling customers that you can't work with them anymore, or telling them you've got to raise prices, or the things that we all avoid because it's slightly difficult and it's easier just to spam out more emails and bring your business that way.
Yeah,
I feel like hustle, hard work gets misaligned there. And I don't think there's the benefits to doing more stuff. I don't think that outweighs doing the harder stuff and pushing our comfort zone. So with regards to hard work, they're the kind of 2 things that I focus on every morning, of making sure I've got questions for guests if I'm doing interviews each morning, making sure that the deals and the pipelines I've got for the ad space have all been aligned, making sure I'm on top of all of that. And I'll do those 2 things before I do absolutely anything else, because they're probably the most boring things that I've got to do during the day. And then I spend the rest of the day trying to get bigger guests on the show, trying to do bigger deals than what I'm comfortable with. And I always try to do a deal that's just 1, bigger than the last, and then 2, that I feel a little bit uncomfortable asking for that kind of cash. And the irony is with me and what I'm doing, no one's ever said no to any of the ad deals that I've done. So, and I've talked about this on my show before, I'm clearly underpricing things, and there's clearly a psychological barrier to what I feel my time is worth, the show is worth, the audience is worth. And so that's something that I've got to break through. But I feel you break through it by working hard to keep just progressing day, and just get that extra kind of 1% on each one.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it might be something that as you have a conversation, as you look through kind of eat the frog, which is the Brian Tracy thing, is exactly where my head was going as you started talking. The way that it feels when you overcome something early in the day, like you feel like you can take on anything. So it's the point where you go sit down and you make 10 phone calls to start the day, but you get a conversation with the CSO at that Fortune 500 company that day, and it starts off your day. Like you just had a meeting with a really big deal. Like your day, you feel like you can take on anything. That adrenaline rush that comes from it is awesome. So I think that's a key call out. That's a really interesting way to think through that. On top of that, like the thing about talking with money, like I think that's an interesting way. And we actually have an episode we talk about price anchoring a little bit in the episode. It is like just throw out the big number. What's the worst that they say, and you can negotiate. So there's some key elements of how do you work through that, and it's interesting to hear you talk and open up on that and go on that topic. So tell me what else have you learned from your show?
Real Sales Talk family, want to take a quick break just to say thank you to our partner Convertist. If you're interested in improving your game to drive leads, opportunities, or closes, join the Convertist Slack group, a place where sales and marketing operators can talk best practices to architect a revenue engine. Cast an application at convertist.com/Slack. That's convertist.com/Slack. Now let's get back to the episode.
This is a quick one for you, Phill, and that is if you're not in a complex, if you're listening to this and you're not in a complex B2B sales role, you need to get in one. If you want to have a job in kind of 2-3 years time from this moment. It's something that I've covered on the show. There's disagreement in the industry. There's people who there's plenty of people that are on both sides of this coin of people will always want to buy from people. People will always want to just have a conversation replaced with an online order form. And I don't think I'm ahead of the curve. And there may be a generational thing here. There may be just the fact that I've grown up on the internet. There may be the fact that AI is coming on the scene. And it was only this week that Facebook had to shut down 2 AIs. Tell me if you know this already before I dive too deep into it. But Facebook had to shut down 2 AIs that were talking to each other because the researchers watching the conversation stopped understanding what they were saying. They were changing the language that they were using so that, not necessarily so other people couldn't spy in on it, but they just found a better way of communicating. And then hell knows what they're talking about or conspiring or trying to put together. So they literally pulled the plug on it. And that's just a precursor to AI on Facebook chat, where you can buy something at a reasonable kind of value level on whether it's $10,000 a month, $20,000 a month. You can have just as interesting and a useful conversation with a bot instantly, scalable, where there's no waiting to get on the phone or waiting for a salesperson to call you back. And I think that's just going to wipe out a whole ton of sales jobs, especially in the SaaS space. And even more so when you're talking about, I've got a question about my Spotify subscription. You don't need to speak to a person on that. You just need a quick couple of back and forth with a bot that's somewhat intelligent. And we can kind of debate what AI actually is versus machine learning, whether it's actually intelligent or not. It's probably a conversation for another episode in itself. But going back to my point here, if you're not in a complex B2B sales role, if you're not in a role where there's multiple decision makers, then there's very little value that you can offer in that everything that you are going to perhaps talk about is already available online. The value that you can offer to that, which is very difficult to replace by an AI, is that you've got an opinion on something, and an opinion mixed in with insights on facts on the backside of that, on the back end of it. That's where you can add real value. And that's going to be difficult to replace over the next kind of 5 years or so. But who knows, in 10 years, it's very likely that the buyer is going to have an AI which has access to all their data. The seller or the vendor is going to have an AI with all their data. They're going to plug them in. They're going to come out with some kind of formula, a score, and then the deal will happen if that's appropriate. There may not be salespeople in 20 years' time. There may not be buyers, procurement officers in 10 years' time. I have no idea. But I know right now that if you're in a transactional sales role, if you're in a sales role where you can sell over 1, maybe even 2 conversations, you need to really rethink this if you don't want to find yourself redundant and out of a job.
Yeah, I think the B2C world is a good indicator of it. And look at the world of Amazon and all the space they've taken. So Amazon is going after huge market shares and things like a book. So I want to buy the Salesman Podcast book. You don't have one yet, right? Well,
it's coming. I'm literally in the midst of writing it right now.
All right. So I want to buy the Salesman Podcast book when it comes out. I can go to Amazon, type in Salesman Podcast, and I can get that book delivered to me in the mail in 2 days. But I think there's things that you don't want to buy. So think of like a car, right? You don't want to go on Amazon and buy a car. You'll buy it online, but you still want to go see it, touch it, feel it. Same thing. I don't want to buy a giant TV on Amazon, although people do it, but I don't want to because I still want to see it. I'm going to spend a lot of money on this thing. I want to
Phill,
feel it, touch it.
I'll challenge you on this, mate. Last week I bought a new BMW M235i. I went on BMW's used approved website. It was in Doncaster, which is probably like half an hour away from here. So I went online. I paid like 200 quid deposit for them to ship it up to Leeds. Traveled down to Leeds. The sales guy called Jordan, very nice guy. I knew more about the car than what he did from all the research that I'd done. Clear. I'm into cars. I've got a GTR here sat on my table, the kind of dream car that I'm aiming towards with all of this. And I knew more about it. I knew more information about the car than what he did. He didn't really have. There was no real how to describe it. There was nothing that he was a gate holder to, which I couldn't get anywhere else. And I literally jumped in it, test drove it. And because it's used approved, it's got the warranty on it. I mean, this is even worse if you're buying a new car because you know exactly what you're getting. It's just kind of there. It's a standard. And I didn't need any information from him, paid cash. So no need to go for any finance or anything like that. I could have done that by going to reception, getting the keys off someone, going for a test drive, handing the keys back, and then paying in cash. Jordan was very nice. And he would, perhaps I'm a odd case in it in that I love cars and I love BMWs. So I could talk myself into the sale. He had a grin on his face the whole way. As soon as he saw me put my foot down and saw my grin on from the acceleration, he knew that he'd closed the deal. And perhaps this is different for someone who's looking for, a kind of 4-door saloon and wants to ask questions about things. But for me, there was no value added other than he was very polite and nice to talk to there. And I spent, kind of thousands of pounds on this car. So I didn't want to. I'm sorry for interrupting you there, but there's that scenario. There's Tesla. I don't know about in the States, but in the UK, I don't think there's any Tesla dealerships. You literally go to what you'd call it like a shopping mall. We have it in the UK. It's slightly different on a high street. It's just a cool shop. There's a bunch of iPads. You choose the color that you want. You pay a deposit. It arrives. You pay for the car, and there is no salespeople. There's no middleman. So I just think it's important to emphasize this, and I may be totally wrong. I appreciate this, but I'm confident when I say it that those roles, those transactional sales roles, including big purchases, they're just done. Another one for you. So my girlfriend just bought a new house. The estate agent was a complete pain in the ass, and in hindsight, she was leaving the job kind of 2 weeks after she kind of facilitated the kind of looking around the house. And so she was chasing my girlfriend, which put a bad taste in her mouth about salespeople, which was unfortunate. But she was chasing my girlfriend because she wanted to close the deal so she could get a commission. She didn't get a commission because she was a pain in the ass in the end. That's another story in itself. But my girlfriend rang up the estate agents. They didn't even send anyone around the house to take them round. My girlfriend then got passed directly to the seller. The seller took my girlfriend around the house. The deal was done behind the scenes. The estate agent essentially didn't do anything other than put one ad up online, which the seller could have done themselves. There's no need for a salesperson in that role either. So clearly we're talking about B2C here versus B2B, but I think we're all going to be surprised in the sales industry in this space how few sales roles there's going to be in 10 years' time. I'm confident of that.
Yeah, and I think if you think about that in a B2B setting, in a B2B setting, that is, hey, I know what I want already. I've already looked at a lot of things out there. I just want to see it, show you. And I think that's kind of what it is. Like, can I take you on the test drive? Can I walk you through the way we're doing this? And maybe Jordan did the job the way he's supposed to. He knew that you're going to buy no matter what. So he knew if he got in the way and oversold you, maybe it turned you off. So maybe he just played dumb sales guy. Said, here's the keys. Go ahead and press the gas and make it go. And I think
but I would have rather paid $1,000 less and cut his commission out the whole deal. Because
That would've
I'm
been that.
I'm the market, right? I'm the buyer.
Yeah.
If enough people demand that of BMW, that they drop the prices and they don't have a salesperson, then that's what will happen. And us as salespeople, unfortunately, have no control of that because the market is always right.
It's true. Yeah. I think there's a lot to that. I'm curious to see where this plays out in the next like 5 to 10 years, because there is people in the world that still want that person that can come be the expert. And you're probably the in the most curves, the early adopter stage, the one that does all the research, that walks in and knows about what they're going to go purchase. And there's a lot of people in the world that are doing that today, but there's still people that need guidance and consultation before they make a decision, because ultimately their job and their careers could be based off of that. So interesting. So one more topic, let's jump into it. So we mentioned earlier personal brands. So tell me more about personal brand. You've done a great job building your personal brand. You've had a lot of people on the show that have built their personal brand. So tell me about that and where your thoughts are there after all the interviews you've done.
Sure. So personal brand is something that I've done indirectly. So I don't have my own personal Instagram account. That's all coming with the book, and I've got to double down and make an effort on it. But I didn't realize the power of this. It sounds so ridiculous. And it's all the stuff I've learned from hindsight of doing the show. It's not stuff that I was clever enough to kind of build into the show and the audience that I've built. But personal brand is crazy because it allows you to scale, know, like, and trust. I have people email me telling me all the financial problems, the things that are going on at home, that the sales managers, I'm choosing my words carefully, the sales manager's an idiot. And I don't know who these people are. And it's a really bizarre thing to happen. I get hundreds of emails every day, and it's people really spilling their hearts to me. And what's happened is they've listened to perhaps 3 months of episodes. Perhaps they've listened to kind of 20, 30 hours. And I don't know the psychology of it. I don't know. It'd probably be an interesting show to kind of dive into, because I imagine there's a tribe element to this. But if you listen to someone for so long, and I'm quite open and honest on the show, and I try and be open and honest on these interviews as well with things that I'm good and bad at and where I'm struggling with, people buy into all of that. And you can scale, again, this know, like, and trust, which is the beginning of Rapport, which is the beginning of kind of a deal potentially in the future. You can scale it really quickly. Now, that works both ways. So I don't know who said this, someone cleverer than me. And but essentially, you are at this moment in time, 2017, what Google says you are. So when you Google Will Barron, you get the Salesman Podcast. Hopefully that looks professional. You get my Instagram, which isn't mine Instagram, it's the Salesman Podcast Instagram. You get Twitter, you get a few other things. I essentially dominate the top page. When you get into that second, third page, you start seeing other interviews. And I don't think there's anything, because I've had a few articles written about me in not a positive light, in a negative light, but because of my personal brand, because of my social media presence, because of the search engine optimization I built in through, inadvertently, not through any real effort of just having lots of people like the content, through lots of traffic being driven to it, that is far higher than any of the negative posts. Now, this works both ways, in that if a potential ad sponsor for me Googles me, if Salesforce Google me, they see all this positive, nice, fluffy, happy stuff. And so they go tick, because nobody goes to the third page in the search engine. It just doesn't happen. And there's probably really interesting data and statistics on that. I think the top click after the advert is something like 50% of all clicks click that, regardless of whether the content is better or better optimized or better keywords or better titles underneath. People are trained to click under the adverts at that top link. So with all that said, if someone Googles you as a sales professional, you've not made an effort to build a social media. It doesn't have to be following. You don't have to have 1 million followers on Twitter. You only need to have your customers somewhat engaged. You have to be the center of attention a little bit. So the way I describe this is, in medical device sales for me, in Yorkshire, here in the UK, all I've got to do is have 40 urologists know who I am. If they use Twitter, I've got to have 40 urologists follow me on Twitter, and I just engage with these 40 people over and over. That's all I needed to hit my target, because I'd be doing, say, £2-3 million a year. Each deal size could be anything from 100 to kind of 1 million or so. So there's not that many deals I need to do with these urologists. Now, if someone Googles me and I've not got the obvious Twitter accounts, the LinkedIn accounts, things like this, and it comes up with my personal Facebook account, and they see me doing tequila from some bar girl's belly button on a Friday night, at a bar, kind of there's people, or you're at a lap dancing club or whatever it is, something obviously that has negative connotations in kind of any language, any country, any format, that's their opinion of you built up right there. And it could be rightly or wrongly. You could be, I've never been to a lap dancing club, so I'm pushing my anecdote here, or my kind of metaphor here, but it could be that you're on a stag do and you're just kind of, and it's totally weird for you. You don't want to be there. You don't approve of it, but your best mate's getting married and that's where he wants to go. So you're just hustling down and taking one for the team. They don't see that. They don't have context of that. They just see you in a place that's probably inappropriate for them as in a professional context to see you in. So long story short, personal brand goes both ways. You can both build an amazing Instagram following and really add value to your customers outside of their work time. You can create content or curate content. You can become an industry insider. You can become the go-to person in the industry, which was inadvertently, again, this was just luck. But in medical device sales, I worked for one company, then moved to their biggest competitor. So I knew all the camera systems, and I'm a huge nerd. So I nerded out on all the camera equipment that I was selling it to surgeons. And so when they had a problem for the company I used to work for, they hated that rep. So they'd call me in, I'd fix my competitor's camera, tell them how shit it is. And of course, kind of big up my own, what I was selling at the time. But they appreciated that I could do, I was an industry expert. For that specific product range, I was an expert on both sides. And so I got brought in and got more face time with that than anything else. So that is one side of it. Use social media if your customers are on there. I guess we'll wrap up with this, but use social media if your customers are on there. Build that presence so you got that know, like, and trust, but then also go that step further if possible and become, even if it's for one product in the range that you've got, even if it's you're selling SaaS marketing software, become the SaaS expert. It doesn't have to be your product, because you'll take customers with you. You'll take those relationships with you as you move around from different companies throughout your selling career. But then don't negate the flip side of this, of if that isn't in your reach, if you feel like you don't have time to do all that, and kind of hint you do have time and you should be doing all this, then make sure that you're negating the negative effects of this. Of when someone Googles you, and I encourage the audience to do this to themselves, just Google your own name, and then your company name, and then just document what's on there. Because if there's anything that you don't control, then you're in trouble. Because someone, even if it's a competitor, if you've never Googled yourself, there could be 5 pages of nonsense blog posts that your competitor who lives across the road, who goes and sees the same customers, I just put up, which is totally slanderous and wrong. But that could be costing you business over the long run.
Awesome. Those are awesome takeaways. So we have 6 things you learned over 300 interviews. So what we do is we do a rapid fire section. It's going to be YouTube exclusive content. What we'll do is we'll wrap up first. Everybody that's listening on the podcast. So everybody's listening on the podcast, thank you so much. Leave a review. If you loved Will or any of our previous guests, leave a 5-star review. We definitely appreciate it. But Will, how can people listening to the podcast find you?
Just very simple. Head over to salesman.podcast. Oh, I can't even get my own domain now. salesmanpodcast.com. It's not as simple. And just come check it out. We do all the content over video. There's the audio side of things as well. Subscribe on iTunes. I always describe the video as the gateway drug to really getting onto the audio side of things. I interview the world's leading experts in sales, in business, in entrepreneurship, in marketing, to widen all of our business acumen. I'm on this journey with everyone else as well. I'm no sales expert, not by a long shot, and happily so. And so I'm just asking the questions that I want to know the answers to, and hopefully the audience engage and enjoy that as well.
Awesome. So go to salesmanpodcast.com, find Will. His content's way more engaging than Sean and I. He's an expert at that. I'll tell you that. So we really appreciate you coming on, Will. Let's jump over. So if you are listening on the podcast, jump over to YouTube. Make sure you subscribe. Will, we're going with 3 rapid fire questions, and just answer what's the first thing that comes top of your head. Okay. This
is dangerous.
This is dangerous. They're layouts. You got this. So, Will, tell us a book they should read and why they should read it. We have this conversation briefly on LinkedIn, so I'm curious to see your thoughts.
I've got to get the wording of it right, but The War of Art by, I think, Stephen Pressfield. That is a book that's a book that every time I read it, it literally kicks my ass. And I don't mean this, and there's no hyperbole there. I'm not hyping it up. Every time I read it, I feel bad about the 5 hours that I've just wasted that morning. And there's no there's no spirituality to it. There's no deep psychology to it. It's just tugging on what makes us human and this innate want to do real work. So something that I've kind of ruined this segment now by going beyond a quick answer, but just one thing here, which I think is important. It talks about having a shadow life and a shadow career versus having your real career. I think a lot of people in sales specifically find themselves falling into sales. They might do okay at it, they might do pretty well at it, but they're not happy and they're not engaged. And I don't want, your audience, Phill, I don't want my audience to be in sales for the long term when it's not right for them. And part of this is that it's a shadow career. They're making great money, but perhaps they should be in marketing. Perhaps they should be in PR. Perhaps they should be doing something that's just a slight tilt on sales where you're still selling. And that was for me. So I knew after reading the book that I was only ever going to be a pretty good salesperson. I was never going to be incredible, but I could add a ton of value to the sales community, to my audience, Sales Nation, and your audience here, Phill, of taking that shadow element of it. I love sales, but I'm perhaps better interviewing and dragging out sales insights than I am closing those huge kind of high pressure deals.
So you just talked about starting your day. And then earlier we talked about eating the frog. So how do you start your day and eat the frog?
Okay, so this sounds a little bit hippie. So this is a Tony Robbins exercise. I get up, there's a really nice park with a big lake right by my house. So I go for a walk. It takes about 25 minutes or so. The first 10 minutes, I force myself to be grateful. So this is literally, so I get out of bed, I down a pint of water, I put on my shoes, no matter what the weather is. If it's pissing it down, if it's crazy raining outside, I'll go on this wander. So I'll spend 10 minutes being really grateful for things. And it starts off being, well, I'm grateful that I'm alive. I'm grateful that I can walk, I've got legs. And then 5 minutes into it, there's this weird transformation of you actually become really grateful for things that you've perhaps been taking for granted, of that my dad's still here, that I've just bought a brand new BMW. And 3 years ago, when I first started the podcast, I was really struggling. I genuinely was to the point of being skinned. And now I've just paid cash for this car that I've wanted for kind of since it very first came out. So you kind of, I do this being grateful for 10 minutes. And then importantly, so this is perhaps more of a kind of gets my sales head on here for slightly. Then I spend the walk back thinking about stuff that I want. So this doesn't have to be materialistic things. This can be goals. It can be challenges. And I'm almost rehearsing and going through in my head. I'm perhaps not doing the whole Conor McGregor visualization of everything that I want to achieve, but I'm thinking, well, I want to achieve this today. I want to do this. I want to have this GTR that I've got it on my desk. I want to have this on my driveway, even though it's a total waste of money and probably will be get driven once a month, and then the battery will be flat and it'll become a huge pain in my ass. But I kind of go through this process of being grateful, which is all a bit like happy, hippie, lovey-dovey, and then go back to being more assertive and drilling into my mind what I want. And then when I come to sit down after that, whether it's the next step for me is typically to either work out, or I'm learning piano at the moment, spend a little bit of time playing piano. Whatever it is, I sit down and do it with real vigor at that point.
Awesome. So we talked about your personal brand and Googling yourself, but when someone Googles Will Barron, tell me something they couldn't find out.
I don't know. I'm pretty open and honest to everything that we talk about on the show. It's a good question. Honestly, if someone wanted to, I've been an internet nerd for a long time now. I could have made my millions long before this moment. In high school, I was making better websites than most of the corporate websites out there. That was a big loss for me and a big miss that I didn't. And it was confidence. It was not understanding that I was an entrepreneur and I had these entrepreneurial tendencies. I didn't jump on that. So I've been online since I was 14. The days of weird screechy dial-up. So so if you Googled hard enough, you could probably find out pretty much whatever you wanted about me. And that's not bait. That's not baiting the audience to do that. But yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty open and honest. I try and be that. And so, at worst, you could find my email address and just ask me, and you find out whatever you wanted from that.
That's like page 6, right, of Google search results. Awesome. So you got to go past the Neverland of page 1 and 2, and then you'll find all the things about Will that you shouldn't be finding out in Google. So, Will, we really appreciate you coming on the show. Once again, how do we find you, and how do we get in touch with you?
Head over to salesmanpodcast.com. If you want to email me, will@salesmanpodcast.com. happy to take questions, happy to go back and forth with people, happy to just kind of engage and where I humbly can help. And I don't do any coaching. I've got no products. I've got no services. I've got nothing that I charge my audience for or your audience for, Phill. Here, there's a book coming in the not distant future, and we'll probably gauge then when I'm doing the tour and the rounds for the book. But I'm just happy to just give and just grow my audience and kind of hopefully drag some of my audience over to you as well. So yeah, the website and the email address.
Really appreciate you coming on. Thank you, Real Sales Talk family. We'll catch you on the next one.
Cheers, Phill. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening to Real Sales Talk, and a big thank you to our sponsor, Convertist. If you enjoyed this episode, go write a review on iTunes or any other podcasting platform.